Good morning. I'm Suzanne Kavik, President of the League of Women Voters of Newcastle, and it's the League's pleasure to welcome you to this forum on the town's budget. The League is a grassroots organization that promotes the active and informed participation of all citizens in government. Voter education has been one of the League's most important functions. The town's budget will be presented by Rob Deary, Town Comptroller. Town Administrator Jill Shapiro and Town Supervisor-elect Lisa Katz are here to answer questions. Lisa should be signing on shortly. And you will have the opportunity to ask questions following his presentation. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Suzanne and Lee and the rest of the League. I always appreciate this opportunity to give my budget presentation before our public hearing. I think it's great. It gives the residents an opportunity to see everything. Sometimes the board meeting is not convenient for everybody, so this is just another forum for us to get this information out. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I usually start off by just talking about the budget, the timeline to create the budget. It's a pretty lengthy process for us. We start in the middle of July, where we meet with all the department heads and we provide reports giving them information of each of their departments over the last 3 years. And we kind of set them off with some homework over the summer months to come back at the end of the summer and give us their projections. Jill and I then meet with everybody in late August. We kind of fine tune or hone some of their projections. And that's what becomes the tentative budget in early October. That's the document we use to meet with the town board and each department head, where they have the opportunity to share their projections with the town board and justify any requests that they have. At that point, the town board meets with Jill and myself, and we make any final decisions. This year, November 10th, we set the public hearing, and that's on the preliminary budget at this point, and that's what I'll be speaking on today. December 7th is that public hearing. I'll give this same presentation on that date. And December 14th, we anticipate adopting the final budget. This year was a little bit difficult. For the 11th year now, we've had the property tax cap in place. It puts a limit on the tax levy that the town can increase each year. As I mentioned, 2022 is the 11th year of the cap. The town has not in the 11 years needed to override the cap, and I'm happy to say we don't again this year for 2022. The tax cap takes the lesser of 2% or the rate of inflation. I think everybody's aware the rate of inflation is reasonably high right now. So the number, we got the maximum number for the tax cap of 2%. By way of comparison, it was 1.56% in 2021. Also factored into the calculation is the tax-based growth factor. This is a measurement of the growth in our actual tax base. In 2022, that number is down from 2021. The number is 1.0039. If you use those two figures added to last year's tax levy, we were able to increase the tax levy by $873,538. And our actual tax levy increase was $671,000. So we remained significantly under the cap once again. Just to show you by the numbers, you do take the actual tax levy from the prior year, from 2021. And if you look kind of the middle column, that actual number was $22,118,188. We add that growth factor and then the tax cap number. And then we are able to use a little bit of the carryover from prior year, and 343,000 was able to be carried over this year. So when you add those totals together, you get the tax levy limit. We could have had a tax levy of $22,991,725, and the total preliminary budget levy is $22,789,304. So we were under by about $202,000. just a chart I have used over the last few years to show the total levy growth, but also the percentage increase over the last few years. So you see 3.03% is it's the largest that we've had in this time span, and I'll talk about those factors in a moment, but it's not really out of range. 2 years ago, we had 2.91%. We've been in the twos before. So that 3.03, while it is the highest we've had, it still is within the tax cap, and it's not too far out of range from what we've had before. Just showing the budget summary here. The town has a total of 23 different funds. The general highway, consolidated water and refuse are considered major funds. All the rest are smaller special districts that don't apply necessarily to everyone in the town. Some of them apply to the vast majority. The vast majority of the town is in the water district, the refuse district. Not everyone's in the parking, the lighting, not everyone is in the sewer districts. So the total value of the appropriations and actually the total amount of the budget is $45,113. And of that amount, $22,789,000 is collected via taxes. So just an overall budget summary and how we got to where we are right now. Probably the biggest driver in this year's budget is the refuse increase. And if you've watched any of the budget meetings or heard any of these discussions or any of the other board meetings, we've talked about this. We've known this was coming for a few years. Our prior contract with SaniPro was a 7-year contract. It really benefited the town. Unfortunately, within those 7 years, global conditions really changed, both as far as disposal of refuse and disposal of recycling, and some situations like recycling where we used to get rebates and credits on a lot of that stuff. Now we're actually having to pay to dispose of. So we were aware that we were going to have a pretty significant increase, but nobody was anticipating the close to $1 million increase that we actually got. There are two components of the refuse collection within the town. That's the collection, which SaniPro does, and then there's the disposal. What happens with all the matter that's collected, it has to be disposed of. So the SaniPro contract increased by about $738,000, and the anticipated disposal cost increased by about $182,000. So that was probably the biggest single driver in this budget alone. Some better news, we were actually able to increase the road paving budget again from $120,000. This number steadily has increased over the last probably 8 to 10 years. We actually had years, unfortunately, 10 years ago or so that we didn't pave any roads. And then there were a few years that we paved just a couple $100,000. When Rob Greenstein and Lisa and that group was elected, I think it was about 8 years ago, they made a concerted effort to increase our road paving. And I think the residents can probably see that, but we're now up to about 1.125 million per year in road paving. We were able to do that. It's an increase of 120,000 over last year. We were able to do that because we got an increase in our state aid that is particular to road paving, and that's an increase in CHIPS money. We typically every year get an amount that they call extreme winter recovery, and there's some Pave New York is another program. So between all those three programs, we were able to see an increase of about $128,000 for next year. This year's budget maintains funds that the town board has had at their disposal and has used to increase some of these boards and commissions for the town. The BAB, I think everybody remembers, again, this was another priority of Rob and Lisa when they got into office. That was funded at $500 a year back before they were elected. That number has increased to $25,000 a year. It's kind of stayed there over the last few years. Those funds are used for the hanging flower baskets that you see during the summer months. They're used for some of the winter holiday decorations, the lighting and the garland around the poles throughout the hamlet. So they've made good use of that money over the last few years. The town board once again has allocated $10,000 to boards and commissions. And this year they had a special call out. Council member Lori Morton requested a special call out for the Council on Race and Equity. And we apportioned a little bit of that town boards and commissions money specifically to the Council on Race and Equity this year. We continue with $25,000 for town board special projects. In the past, that has gone to such things as the electronic sign downtown. We use that to promote some of our initiatives, the No Knock initiative, the coyote whistles, and those types of things have been funded out of this line. The 2022 budget includes the purchase of 3 new police vehicles. Obviously, we have a vehicle replacement schedule that our police chief maintains, and some years it's 1 or 2. This year it happens to be 3 that need to be replaced. We maintain a total workforce of 116 full-time positions for about a total of $11.3 million. That's actually up by 1 from last year. We had 115 last year. We've restored a Department of Public Works laborer that was included in the budget in 2020 due to COVID concerns and financial concerns related to COVID. We removed that in 2021. We have restored that for next year. It's just a chart that shows the total breakdown. When I showed the chart a while back with all the funds in the special districts, this shows you that the town general and highway fund, those are the 2 funds that pertain to every resident in town. Makes up about 65% of the overall budget. Water and refuse, as I mentioned, 2 of the other major funds make up 21% and 9%, and then the various special districts account for a much smaller proportion of the total budget. Okay, just going to go over some of the key revenue sources. For the general fund, to start off with, county sales tax. And I've got a little chart that I'm going to show in a moment and show you kind of historically where we've been with this. But this number is about $4 million. That's an increase of $700,000 over last year. In 2019, if you remember, Westchester County added a 1% additional sales tax, and we were in 2019. We saw a slight effect from that because that came into effect. I think it was August 1 or September 1, but it was only about a quarter of the year at most that we saw that increase. Unfortunately, due to COVID last year, the number wasn't quite as high as we would have expected. And in 2021, as the economy rebounded, we've got a big bump from that, and we're comfortable raising that number up to $4 million for next year. State aid coming from mortgage tax, we increased that slightly over last year. Again, I'll show you the projections in a little bit, but kind of, I guess, conservative to pessimistic on this number for next year. We did see a little dip in that with the change in the SALT deductions a few years back. That number actually dipped. It rebounded significantly over the last 2 years during COVID, with people, I think, leaving the urban areas and the more densely populated areas and coming out to the suburbs here. So this year we're expecting a nice chunk for mortgage tax. Next year, I think it's uncertain. There's a little bit of uncertainty in the overall economic forecast, and I'm comfortable raising that by about $25,000, but not much more than that. Commuter parking fees, and unfortunately, that was one revenue source that was significantly impacted by COVID. We typically would see about $925,000 to $950,000 a year for our commuter parking permits, and unfortunately, we're significantly lower than that. We had that budgeted at $500,000 this year. It remains to be seen if we will reach that number. We're currently, I think probably yesterday or the day before, we kicked off the renewals for next year, and those run through December 15th. So at that point in time, we'll see where we are. We do anticipate a little bit of an uptick next year. We've increased that number to 600,000, assuming more and more people will be going back to Manhattan to commute. Even so, that number will still be about 2/3 of the pre-COVID number. Building permits, again, I'll show the forecast for this year. That was, our building department has been booming. I think anybody that has had an opportunity to either come to town hall or to go to the development department will see that they are extremely busy. Building projects throughout town have continued, and with the anticipated beginning of the residential areas over at Chappaqua Crossing, we're comfortable increasing that to about $950,000 for 2022. Concession income, I include that. There's not a big change there. That's the money that we get from Cablevision. Well, it's Altice now and Verizon for the right to do business in the town. One of those contracts is coming up soon. I think it's Verizon, and we will be renegotiating that contract. Hopefully we'll be able to stay in that same ballpark. And summer camps is probably the next or the last really big revenue source from the general fund. We leave that unchanged from 2021 at $465,000. Due to COVID, we did not reach our goals over the last 2 years, but we were able to adapt pretty well. We moved our summer camp program over to Amsterdam Park. And unfortunately, the one program that we couldn't run was the On the Go camp, which is probably, I think, our most popular, most successful, and probably the biggest revenue driver. So we're hoping to have that back next year, and we feel comfortable with that budget projection. A couple of the other smaller funds, the highway fund, there aren't a lot of revenue sources there, but the one big source is the state aid. And as you saw on the expense side, we've increased the revenue side to $345,000 due to those anticipated increases from the state. In the water fund, we get about $4.3 million from general sales to both residential and commercial entities, and our sales to the village of Pleasantville total about $1.5 million. And the last of the major funds, the refuse fund, compost and mulch sales and yard waste remain unchanged from prior years. We've kind of settled into that level. In past years, we've made more money off of that, but we've also taxed our machine, a couple of pieces of machinery that we use to create the compost and mulch. So, we're trying to keep those machines running without replacing them. They're quite expensive, and as a result, the revenue related to those two budget lines remains unchanged over the last couple of years. Just going to show the historical trends for some of our large revenue sources over the last probably 7 years or so. I'll note the 2021 number, that's an estimated number. It's not the budget number. It's estimated based on what I'm seeing right now. And the 2022 number is the budget. So the first line, the top line there is sales tax. And you can see the increase from 2015 to 2022. If you look at 2019, you see a pretty nice bump, and that was the first year of the additional 1% sales tax. You see a slighter bump there in 2020. I think had COVID not hit, we would have probably been in that area of $4 million last year. But the second and third quarters, where a lot of the businesses were shut down altogether, had a significant impact on our sales tax last year. So I do project about $4.1 million for this year. Remaining conservative, I've budgeted $4 million for next year. You see the mortgage tax, that's the kind of, I don't know, I guess magenta line underneath. You see that's kind of varied over the years to a low in 2019, and I think that's where we saw the effect of the SALT deductions, and home sales kind of dipped at that point in time. we've seen them rebound significantly, and this year numbers are through the roof, and we're anticipating about $1.6 million this year. Again, to remain conservative, and I think most analysts expect interest rates to increase somewhat next year at some point. We're going to leave that number at 950. For building permits, again, over the years, you see last year we were really affected in 2020 with COVID, and that was the lowest number that we've had in a number of years. And so this year we definitely had a rebound. We're going to remain a little conservative there and bring that number up to 950,000. In the darker blue line, you see the parking permits. Over those years, you see the 2020 numbers, kind of stunning compared to what we've had when we were used to $900,000+ to have a sub $100,000 year. That was that definitely affected our overall revenues for the year. We're hopeful of reaching 500 this year and 600 next year. And similarly, you see the summer camp numbers, where we had a high of about 518,000 in revenue in 2018. Kind of dipped a little bit in 19, and then COVID really hit in 20 and 21. We hope to rebound in 2022. It's a chart just showing a breakdown, and probably the biggest takeaway from this is that about 51% of the overall revenue is brought in through property taxes. You see departmental income and sales tax, each a little over $4 million there. Those provide 9 and 10% of the income, and then various other sources of income. Okay, shifting gears to the other side of the ledger, we've got the key expenditures for 2022. I'll first talk about expenditures that affect all the major funds. That would be the general, highway, refuse, and water funds. The biggest driver of these is always the employee benefits. Our town, unlike some others, has had some really great news on the health insurance front over the last couple of years. You know, I typically mention this. I'm involved. I'm on the executive board of directors for our healthcare consortium. Our participation in that consortium has actually allowed us to have a flat increase for 2022. I think we had a slight, maybe it was 1.5% increase for 21, and 22 is no increase whatsoever. That compares really favorably versus probably what the rest of the world is seeing right now. I know municipalities that are in the night shift program are seeing rates increase over 10%. And if you look at our overall cost of 4.9 million, 10% of that, you're close to a $500,000 increase. So, you know, the town has been with MEBCO, I think, for over 20 years. The program remains strong. We added another very large school district this year, the Mamaroneck School District, that allows us to remain strong. Our claims history has been great. And again, I would point out that's a just real benefit to the taxpayers of the town to be able to provide really excellent service to the residents, to the employees of the town at a rate that is significantly below what other municipalities are seeing. The New York State retirement, we got some really good news this year for those costs. If you remember last year, unfortunately, they take a snapshot of what the market looks like on April 1. And if you remember what the market looked like on April 1 of 2020, that was about the time it tanked due to COVID. So we had significant bump in 2021 in retirement costs. Well, when they took that snapshot in April of this year, they saw a completely different number as the economy had rebounded due to us coming out of COVID and some of the relief measures coming from the federal government. And as you can see, we're projecting close to a $200,000 decrease actually in those costs for 2022. Workers' compensation, we have remained steady over the last few years. I'm projecting a slight decrease. Our claims history has been phenomenal. If you remember, I think in 2014, the town changed carriers from PERMA to State Insurance Fund. At that time, we were quoted close to $1 million on the renewal for workers' comp coverage. And kind of coinciding with Rob and Lisa being elected, Jill was appointed to the town administrator. And at that point, we really made it a focus to look at these workers' comp claims and why these were so high and what we could do to control them. And you see the results here. Our rates going forward are based on our claims history, and we've been able to lower those claims significantly. So again, we expect another good year. Our debt service payments, these are essentially what I term our capital costs. Typically, we borrow money for capital costs only. The debt service for 2022 is about $2.9 million. It's about $130,000 less than the prior year. Towards the end of this presentation, I have a chart showing our debt service projected over the next few years. We did bump up legal expenses a little bit this year to about $50,000. It appears that we're going to retain Keen and Bean once again. They have promised us a retainer that doesn't increase, and the hourly rates outside of the retainer are expected not to increase either. The reason for this increase, though, is unfortunately we have one union out of contract right now and another that expires at the end of 2022. We expect some additional costs related to the negotiation of those two contracts and possible Article 78s that are down the road. Looking at some of the expenditures in the other funds, already mentioned before during this presentation, road paving, permanent improvements, that increases to 1.245 million. The next couple are weather related. We had a pretty good year in the beginning so far of 2021. Hopefully we don't see a ton of snow before the end of the year, but we're comfortable leaving these two estimates for salt and overtime for snow removal at 295,000 and 195,000 respectively. If you look at kind of a period of over 7 years or so, some years we hit on this projection, some years we miss. It's totally weather dependent. I guess over a period of 7 years is probably a wash. On a good year, basically we'll add to our fund balance. On a bad year, we'll take away from our fund balance to cover it, but we don't miss by too much typically. Another line that remains the same from last year, brush and tree work, remains at about 175,000. This number's increased steadily over the years. It was below 100,000 probably 5 or 6 years ago. And unfortunately, due to an increase in the frequency of storms and severe storms that we've seen through the town over the last few years, we've had to increase that number. I think everybody that has driven through town after Ida or Isaias or any of those things that have come through here recently notice a significant number of downed trees, and we just don't have the staff to handle all that. So all of that work is outsourced to a vendor. Moving to the water fund, the largest cost in the water fund, number one is the plant operations. We pay an outside entity to run our water treatment plant. That's a little over $1 million a year. Then the cost of the raw water. We share some of those costs. It's not quite 2/3, 1/3 with Pleasantville. It's in that neighborhood. So you see the cost of water totaling about $1.3 million total. Again, some of the costs that we share with Pleasantville, cost of electricity for the water treatment plant and electricity for some of our backup pumps. Those, we expect a little bit of a dip next year in the backup pumps. I think, Jill, maybe you can correct me, but I think that we're running those pumps through the middle of January, and then that project takes a breather next year.
Just for a year. So I think we are going to be seeing that going forward. We just had a water plant meeting this morning, and it is confirmed that they're looking at the middle of January they did say that the project is going quite well, but they are expecting it to go through the middle of January. We were hoping it would be earlier, but not the case.
And then they won't be doing work at the end of the year, correct? That we had that we've seen in the past few years.
Right.
And the last fund, we'll talk about the refuse fund, and that was mentioned earlier. And the two main expenditure lines there are the refuse collection and the transfer site charges. And see the total for the refuse collection is about $1.9 million, and the transfer site charge is about $707,000. This chart just shows the total breakdown of all the costs in the $45 million budget. Some of the largest single source is the contractual budget lines, and followed closely by the total personnel lines. That's salary, overtime, and then the employee benefits account for about 20%. So I've taken the average household, and this is just for the general and highway funds. I mentioned before, these are the two funds that pertain to each and every resident in the town, regardless of where you live. And the average tax bill for the average home in town is about $2,709. And this is just a kind of a breakdown of where your money goes. See, it looks to be about a quarter of it goes to employee benefits, and another quarter to your police protection. The highway department, about $335. I always like to highlight this, the snow removal. Each home's paying about $54. I think that's a bargain when we go through some of these significant storms, and you can wake up in the morning and still, for the most part, be able to hop in your car and drive to work or get wherever you need to, because our guys have been working overnight. So I think $54 is a pretty reasonable amount to pay for your snow removal. Wanted to highlight for a minute just the refuse collection and disposal costs that we've seen, and just kind of how that impacts the town residents over the last probably 12 years here. If you look at that single kind of a dark navy or black line, that's the rate that each resident pays for your refuse removal, and the kind of lighter colored blue and pink bars are the actual expenditure lines for those. And if you look early on in 2010, 11, and 12, 13, 14, that's when we had 2 times a week refuse collection in 2010, I think. So we started, in residents at that time and before that were paying about they were paying $520 a year per parcel. I think it was 2011, we went back down to once a week collection. And you see the expenses reduced slightly. That's because we were still in the middle of the contract. The vendor at that time reduced costs for us a bit, but they didn't reduce it probably to the full effect that you see. So it went from 520 to 485 here. Again, 2015, that's when the last contract was negotiated, and we really got the full impact of reducing it to once a week. That rate remains steady for what looks like 7 years here at $440 per parcel. You do see a slight increase here in the revenue, and that's about the time that the global market started to change. We had the vendor come to us, and there were some costs that unfortunately we had to accept being increased, in particular some of the disposal costs. So the town was able to hold that steady at $485 a parcel. And then you see the effect of that increase in the contract this year, and that cost is going to be about $526 a parcel now for your refuse collection. So unfortunately, about an $86 increase per parcel. I will mention that we're going to see increases over the next couple of years due to the tax cap. We weren't able to raise and probably wouldn't have wanted to raise all of that in one lump sum. So we've kind of developed a plan of rationing some of our fund balance and offsetting that with some tax levy increases. And so that's how we're going to get where we need to get to with the increased refuse collection costs. Okay, a topic that came up a couple of years ago because we had some increases in the Northern Fire Protection District. I've continued to include it in my presentation, just really for informational purposes. Newcastle and Millwood Fire District, those are separate entities from the town. They create their own budgets. They're voted on by town residents. The board members are voted on by town residents, and they prepare the budgets. So that's separate and apart from the town of Newcastle. How this plays into my actual budget is the Northern Fire Protection District, and that serves an area adjacent to the village and town of Mount Kisco. And the town of Newcastle actually pays the village and town of Mount Kisco to provide fire protection services there. We've looked at that over the last couple of years, but unfortunately, it still remains the best option. And a chart showing this is again an average parcel over the 3 different districts. You see the Millwood Fire District, who in the last few years, well, it's been several years now, but completed some capital improvements to their facilities. You see the green on the bottom is the Newcastle Fire District. I know that they're considering working on their facilities, but you see there's a pretty big gap between Millwood and Newcastle Fire District. And right in the middle is the Northern Fire Protection District. You see the big jump from 2019 to 2020. That was when Mount Kisco completed their capital projects, or actually began the borrowing. I think the completion of those projects was just a couple of weeks ago. But you see the increase in the effect that that had on our residents. It actually decreased a little bit from last year, and that's due to the debt service decreasing from one year to the next as the interest payments decreased just a little bit. So again, the Northern Fire Protection District, that's part of the town's budget, but Millwood and Newcastle are just purely informational. Other than collecting their taxes, I have no role in the creation of those budgets. Just to show a little bit of the tax information, the tax rate information from one year to the next. Just to begin at the top with the total assessed value for the town, you see that that increased pretty significantly from 2021 to 2022, was up almost 1%. For purposes of kind of an apples to apples comparison, I've used the average assessed value at 170,000. It goes back and forth throughout the year. If you go to the assessor's office, some years it's 168, some years it's 172. But for purposes of just displaying year over year, if you lived in the same house, just wanted to give the same example rather than changing that number each year. That average house equates to a market value of about $877,000 this year. That changes just due to the equalization rate. It's not that you really lost the value in your house. It's just a factor that's used in the apportionment for school district taxes. The actual tax rate increased by about 0.87%, showing again the tax cap at 2%, the tax rate growth factor at 1.0039, and the overall tax levy increase of 3.03%. And just using those same average assessed values of $170,000, this is kind of an overall look of all the taxes that a Newcastle resident would pay. If you see the two green shaded areas, the dark green is the town of Newcastle, the town tax. The green is estimated special districts, which would include water and refuse. And I think I pulled out the fire districts in the kind of magenta block there. That's what the town collects, and that's part of the town's budget typically. The bottom two, you see the pink is Westchester County, and the purple is the Chappaqua Central School District. So again, that's taking estimates from those budgets. I think Westchester County, actually had a decrease this year, if I recall, from their budget. It had been flat over the last couple of years. And I think CCSD had a slight increase this year. Just another way to show this, if $100 bill, about $75 of your total overall taxes goes to the school district. The town and the county are pretty similar at about $10, and the special districts are pretty much similar, again, around $250 or $275. Yeah, I mentioned before the debt service schedule, and just to kind of show where that number is headed over the next couple of years. The town typically borrows every probably 3 to 5 years. It's been that standard for probably about 20 years, and we've been able to maintain cash flow and our schedule of projects that we're able to do within that schedule. So the town last borrowed in 2018. We anticipate borrowing in 2022. Typically, if we do that, the first payment wouldn't come due until about 2023. So you see a drop off from, we kind of try to time that so we don't see such a big hit when we add new debt. So from 2022 to 2023, there's a drop off, and then there's another significant drop off down here at in 2025. Okay, in the last couple of slides, I'll talk about our fund balance. The town has had a pretty healthy fund balance over the last several years. The biggest one, or probably the most important to the town, is it's the general fund, unassigned fund balance, and that's really our rainy day fund. If we encountered any difficult financial situations, such as COVID, you see we have money in the bank to kind of handle that. If you look at the beginning of 2011, and I usually go back to that point, that's year that I took over as the comptroller, so I kind of like to highlight where the fund balance was at that point in time, and then if you look where it's gone over a period of time, and we've been able to restore that fund balance. Starting in 2020, we began to kind of slowly apportion some of that fund balance to help with the debt service for the downtown infrastructure project. And we actually, if you see the big increase from 2019, to, rather big decrease from 2019 to 2020, that actually is reflective of the part of the $700,000 that we allocated this year in fund balance due to COVID, that it looks more and more likely that we will end up restoring as our revenue figures look pretty good. The last slide I'll highlight now is where I project the fund balance to go through 2023. And if you look at the magenta line, that still is a gradual reduction in that number. That's taking into account projection of a zero increase in that number. And only once in the last 10 years did we not actually add to fund balance, but I would never project that we're going to add to it. This just reflects the amount that we have apportioned for the capital costs. So if you see, even at the end of 2023, we're still at a pretty healthy 6.1 million. I think that's still above 20% of our appropriations. The auditors like to see that number no lower than 15%, and I think we're actually, it's in the probably the mid 20s there. So that number stays pretty healthy. The other one that I just want to highlight is the refuse fund, and that's that darker purple. And you see where that starts out at about 2.4 million, and you see by the end of 2023 that goes down to 722,000. That was, as I spoke earlier, of the increase in the refuse collection costs, and we have appropriated or we have scheduled appropriations of fund balance through the next several years. What's not included in this slide, but was included in my discussion with the board, is that in 2024, I anticipate that number to move back over $1 million. And that's kind of where I'd like to have that as far as rainy day funds. So that is anticipated to increase in 2024. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and take any questions that anybody may have.
If people have any questions they want to put in the chat, I have a couple that have been sent to me. So, but feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll ask them. I don't know, Jill, do you have anything to add before we move to questions? No?
No, thank you.
Okay. So one question I got from a league member is, the police, the police department has a vehicle replacement schedule. Does the rest of the town have a similar schedule?
It does. I should have mentioned that, but yeah, the town definitely does have Bart Carey, and the Department of Public Works maintains a vehicle replacement schedule for public works. And that's both with the lighter vehicles, which might be smaller pickups or sedans, vehicles that maybe a building inspector would use or the assessor would use to, we're actually next year, I think within the capital budget, we're going to replace a street sweeper, I think a snow plow, and there was one other vehicle that escapes me, but we definitely do maintain those vehicle replacement schedules for all our vehicles.
And is there any thought to replacing some of them with electric vehicles or hybrid? I don't know, we might already have some hybrids.
So we do have a couple electric vehicles in there. It is in consideration each time we replace a vehicle if an electric vehicle would make sense. I imagine that as the availability and kind of the technology in electric vehicles increases, probably the opportunity to use more of them will come for us. Probably not practical for such a thing as giant snowplow or a street sweeper, yeah. But for some of the smaller vehicles, yes. So so that has been considered, and we do have a few in the fleet at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then on the garbage contract, can you explain a little bit what the collection versus disposal, and whether there's any piece of that we like on the disposal piece? Is there something that we as community members, if we decrease our amount of garbage, will that help offset some of these increases? I mean, I understand some of it's fixed.
So yes, because the disposal costs are a per ton rate, or it's by the amount that's disposed of. So certainly, that would have a smaller impact. The collection is really the biggest part of that. We pay a company to come through town and collect the refuse.
Right.
And some of the costs that they're bearing is the increased cost of fuel. And they've had some issues. I think there was a transfer station, Jill, I think it was in Mount Kisco, that they used to bring the material to. That has closed. So now they need to bring the material up to Peekskill, and they have to use different trucks, and there's increased fuel costs there. So, those are some of the issues.
Right.
On the
so collection is like really a fixed. I mean, we don't have any.
Is fixed. Yep. There's nothing that you can do to change that number. The disposal is, though, it is by the weight of what is being disposed of. So obviously, if there's any reduction in that, you'll see a reduction in those costs.
Right. And I think you have to be a little bit careful about the disposal. We have limited avenues to dispose of things. The recycling market has collapsed. This is not just a Newcastle issue. This isn't a New York issue. This is a worldwide issue, where the markets in China that used to accept this, though now as we're learning what they were doing with it is pretty horrific. But, the limited channels that were available to dispose of recycling have become even more limited. People generate a certain amount of garbage. And if, we, let's say, limit the amount of pickup that we allow each resident for acceptance with SaniPro, what happens to the rest of that stuff? So that means that there's an increase of dumping along the sides of the reservoirs. If you drive up there, that doesn't happen in our town because we accept all that stuff for bulk pickup. So there is a thoughtful and smart way to assist in reducing the amount of garbage that we generate. I know that there has been discussion about food waste and perhaps helping reduce the amount of disposal we have by increasing our food waste disposal, but that actually added significantly to the we got a single bid on it, and in addition to it was for the entire town, and it was tremendously expensive. And we're hopeful that as more and more people sort of turn on to disposing of food waste through compost, that hopefully next contract will be something that we'll be able to seriously consider. Rob mentioned the fact that this contract is actually a 3-1-1 contract, so it allows us the opportunity to take and really do our due diligence between now and the next renewal to see if there are options that are open to us, to see what we can do to sort of control the costs and basically control the amount of waste that we generate.
Right.
Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, it's very informative, because I think people need to know, what our options are and what, if anything, and it's a small amount we probably can control. And then I only have
our options were very limited. It was brought up during a few of the budget hearings that we went out to bid twice. We actually rejected the bid the first time because we had one bidder. And we had one bidder the second time, and we reached out to a couple other entities that we thought would have been interested and that actually reviewed the bid documents, and they weren't interested in submitting a bid. So it's kind of, I think we're kind of rare in this model that we use. I don't think there are a lot of other municipalities that use the collection and disposal the way that we do. So there maybe weren't a lot of vendors that were interested in this market.
Mm-hmm. And the final question that I have is, the recent infrastructure bill, and whether there's any thought that perhaps there might be some funds so that we might not have, I heard say, with the MTA, that they're hopeful that the money they get through the infrastructure bill will allow them to borrow less, so decreasing their debt service.
Right.
And it's probably a little early to say, but I don't know if they're.
So I'll say the first part, and then Jill, I think maybe you have something to add. So I will say the town has already received the first payment. So there was the CARES Act money that was approved last year, and the town is scheduled to receive a total of $1.8 million. We've received about 900,000 so far. We get 50% this year and 50% next year. There were very specific purposes that you could use those funds for. It wasn't just to add back to your fund balance or to add into the general fund or operating costs. But one of the purposes that you could have used those funds for were water and sewer infrastructure upgrades. And we have kind of earmarked that, if not all of that, a good portion of that $1.8 million, we have some significant water line upgrades that we anticipate using that for. So we've got a project that we're working with the county on 120 to replace a significant amount of water lines up there. We also know that there are some smaller areas throughout town that we're going to be relining the water mains, do a cement relining process. We're actually studying that now to determine where exactly we need to do that work. So kind of loosely right now, that money is earmarked there where, yes, possibly that would have been borrowed or at least reduced our fund balance, or a combination thereof, and we'll use those specific funds that are already guaranteed to the town for that purpose. Yeah, we were happy to understand that the infrastructure bill was passed, and I think we have prepared. I'll let Jill speak to a list of kind of shovel-ready projects that we would like to throw our hat in the ring for.
Mhm.
Yeah, we thank you, Rob. We actually have a laundry list of identified projects running from the continued cement lining to the Bedford Road pump station, which needs a significant upgrade. Just in the pumps that are there, we'd like a backup generator for it. It needs a roof. This provides water for the Lawrence Farm side of town. It's a small pump station that actually sits by the pole barn. We have a permanent easement there for it on the high school property. So we have a laundry list of projects. The town board earlier this year approved something called a PER, a preliminary engineering report, which is basically a survey of our entire water system, which would identify for us and prioritize the water projects for the next 10 years in anticipation of the infrastructure bill being approved by Congress. But even if that failed, there are consolidated grant applications that are available every year. And this was to put us in the best position to be able to apply for these monies. So even without the federal monies, there are state monies that are available every year, and we're aware of them. And so the board was very cognizant of this and aware that in order to strengthen our positions, that this PER was required. And so we are well on our way to doing that. So yeah, I think we're well positioned. How the money is actually distributed and how it gets, how it actually comes down to the local municipalities will be very interesting. Whether or not we're receiving it straight from the state, or the feds are going to give it to the states are then going to give it to the county, and the county is going to parse it out, or they're going to spend it on their own projects. It's hard to say whether or not local government will actually see that money directly.
And Jill, we can also add on that, we have received some of these state grants over the last few years. The last few years running, we've received the SAM grants, which we had about 325,000 or so. Yes. For the basketball court and playground. We had another around $300,000 for the Millwood lighting project. Yes. This year we've submitted applications for the field renovation up at Amsterdam. We're optimistic that we'll receive that one. We currently have an application. Is it the TAP CMAQ grant for yes. the chap line? I don't recall the name of the grant that we got, the sewer work during the infrastructure project.
That was a CFA, a consolidated funding application from the state. And we got like $460,000 to help defray the cost of the wastewater sewer portion of our infrastructure project. So we have been getting monies all along. Right. And again, hoping to strengthen our position as, more and more communities are understanding that these monies are available. The competition for them gets tougher and tougher. So hoping to put ourselves in the best position to be able to get some of these monies.
And unfortunately for some of them, we're not need-based. Right. We don't qualify for some of those. We are trying to do some creative applications for some CDBG money. We're hoping to renovate the facilities here at Town Hall, the bathroom facilities for handicap access, ADA access, and that type of thing. And we're hoping. I don't know if we've submitted that yet, but we're
next year it gets submitted.
Yeah.
we're putting the documentation together this year. It's a multi-year process in order to apply for the funds.
Yeah, and just staying on the topic of the grants, we just got $80,000 from NYSERDA for the EV chargers that we're going to replace at the train station, South Greeley parking lot, Amsterdam, and Millwood Park.
Millwood, right?
Yeah.
So again, we've already got chargers at Gedney and the Allen Place parking lot and at the train station, and just basically expanding access to EV chargers throughout town.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I think that's it on the questions. So as always, we thank you guys for doing this and explaining the budget to us. And, it always shows the great work that's done at Town Hall by the board and also by all of this, all of you guys, all the staff. So I know it's a long process, but it's very appreciated that you explain it to us each year. So
Great job, Rob.
yeah, as always.
As
Yeah.
always.
Lee,
Yeah,
we didn't,
thanks.
we didn't mention the other grant.
Oh, it's
Pshaw,
Yeah.
she
The
says.
Drug-Free
Yeah.
Communities Grant, the Newcastle United for
Yeah.
Youth, that was, we were awarded, we were in the end of it, we finished our 5th year and we were extended beyond that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great job to you
Yes,
and
and
Leslie.
that's-
Lee
yeah.
and Leslie's
Fabulous.
online, and I've worked with Lee and Leslie for the last 5 years on that project, and still going strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're stuck with us for another. In fact, I will email you because we're almost ready to sit down and make sure we agree on our year-end number. So
Good.
now that you're done with this one,
Yeah.
we can move on to the next.
I'm
Well,
afraid
thank you,
had free
everyone.
time.
Yeah, and we'll put it up on on our website when we get the link. And I know it's always on. And also always thank you to Newcastle, NCCMC for putting these together for us, because I certainly wouldn't be able to do that. So
Thank you, Carrie.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
day.
Pam.
yeah,
And thanks to
thank
the
you.
league. We so appreciate the opportunity.
Great,
you.
thanks. Bye.
Bye now.